Welcome to Lead Wisely by WonderTour. Today, episode 115, we are looking in our villains series. We are looking at the movie The Batman, and we're going to be talking about two villains from the movie The Batman. So, this episode, we're going to start out with mob boss Carmine Falcone. So, Drew, why don't you get us started here? What does Falcone's leadership style reveal about the long-term consequences of prioritizing personal gain over anything vaguely resembling public good?
Carmine is awesome in this movie, or well played, we'll say. He's definitely not an awesome leader. Previously, we've talked about Hans Gruber, and we had some good things to say from Die Hard. We talked about Darth Vader, and there were some positives in Anakin and Darth Vader. Not a lot positive to say about Carmine Falcone. Carmine is, if we were just to kind of diagnose what his problems are as a leader, at some point in his life, he made some wrong decisions. And rather than try to make those right, rather than owning up to those and paying whatever the cost was to the person he wronged or society or something, what he does is he just keeps doubling down. He is the perfect example of the person who gets caught up in a vice, gets caught up in doing the wrong thing, and they just can't get away from it. And so they just keep getting more and more just entrapped into this person that they're becoming. We talk on WonderTour about becoming magnanimous, and that's our goal as leaders. Carmine is kind of the opposite. He's becoming anti-magnanimous. He's becoming more and more controlling, more and more violent, more and more necessarily limiting of others and pushing away of others, because that's the only way for him to stay afloat. He's kind of gotten to this point of moral justification. And when I say moral justification, what I mean is comparing yourself and your actions to others and then judging them accordingly and being like, well, that's not as bad. Or like, well, if they were in my position, then, they might do the same thing. And in the end, what's the goal of that? So that you can feel decent about yourself, so that you can sleep at night. But the problem is, if you continually do that over and over again, then you start to build up a habit of bad relationships with others, very little trust. And so, in order to get anything done, what do you have to do? You have to lie, you have to coerce, you have to use your leverage as the only means of getting anything done. And that's how we find Carmine. The issue is that he's not really a leader. When we talk about leaders, leaders are inspiring people to do big things. Carmine has nobody he can inspire to do big things. The only way he can get anybody to move on any initiative he has is to coerce them into doing it.
Yeah, no, that's a really, I love that. I love the way you set that up because when we looked at Darth Vader and Anakin, like we talked about how in his downfall arc, he keeps doubling down on his mistakes. Like he's never willing to just say like, I'm wrong. Right. And so that comes back to bite him. And I feel like what we're seeing here in Falcone is that he is at the furthest logical extrapolation end of that arc. He's been doubling down on it's all about me and I have to take care of myself and I can't possibly be wrong and I can't possibly lose and I have to be in charge and in control and winning all the time. He's been doing that for so long that he has no other options. Like you said, all of his relationships are fear and leverage. That's the only interaction that he's got with the rest of the world. Right, and so he's wealthy and he's living in this club and he's got people hanging out with him. And he's got beautiful women around and he's got all the glittering elite come to bend the knee and he has all the money he needs apparently. Right, like it's kind of sort of working for him, but it's also kind of sort of not. Like you can see what's coming, right? You can see all of his relationships are like his own daughter is trying to kill him and his lieutenants sort of despise him and would be perfectly happy to be out from under him, and the people that are around him are all sort of under his thumb in one way or the other.
And we see this so often. I mean, it's common no matter where you look in any sort of a corrupt organization. It's like you're just a Jenga tower that's one block being pulled away from all tumbling over. As soon as the method by which you convince people to do things is strictly, like you said, leverage and fear, they will turn on you in an instant. And we're going to talk about that in our next segment when we bring up our moment for this episode.
Hi, I'm Brian Litwell.
And I'm Drew Perot.
And we are on a journey to lead wisely, to become better leaders by touring fantastic worlds and inspiring lore by going on a WonderTour.
We connect leadership concepts to story context because it sticks to our brains better. You can find out more at WonderTourPodcast.com or on YouTube by looking up Lead Wisely, all one word.
Right, so Carmine Falcone, purely self-interested, calculating, thinking long-term, but only in the sense of how can I not ever get into trouble. We see him manipulating the people around him, like in particular in the scene where Bruce Wayne comes in to confront him about the history of how it turns out he was behind something with, rubbing out the journalist that was threatening Thomas Wayne back in the day. We see him in this scene very skillfully manipulating people around him, in particular Bruce. Like he sort of spins the story several different ways. Like, oh, I was actually the good guy because I was friends with your dad because he helped me that time by, when I stumbled into his house and I'd been shot, he saved my life. And so I really liked him. And so I helped him out when he was in trouble. Oh, but then when he got shot, oh, that wasn't me. That was some other bad guy. Right. And so he's really good at playing other people. He's really good at playing on Bruce's emotions and his weaknesses and sort of his perceived motivations to put himself in a position of being, well, you actually, if you think about it, you kind of owe me a favor.
That is his only, and I'm not even going to call it a redeeming trait. It is his only really skillful trait, is he's able to read somebody else, understand what they want, and figure out how to give that to them, but do it in a way that they owe him one.
Right, exactly. Which is a very Godfather thing, right? It's a very mob boss kind of, a way to represent a character, but it's also so this is the one thing, right? His relationships are all based on manipulation and leverage, and he is perfectly shameless about lying in the service of those relationships. But that leads us to our other problem, right? Which is that what is the consequence of when you make every decision solely about yourself and all of your relationships are based on fear and leverage and lies, which are inevitably able to be seen through? What situation does that put you in? Where does that lead to, Drew?
Yeah, he just has to keep building up this wall to protect him from all of the other people and from all of the decisions that he's made. And he just keeps building it brick by brick, decision by decision. He's building this wall to protect him because that's the only way that he can be safe anymore, because he can't trust anybody, because he doesn't extend himself for anybody. He doesn't build strong relationships. And then he turns around, and I don't even think he realizes it. That's the crazy thing, is he becomes so blind, he doesn't even realize, dude, you just built yourself a grave. You just built yourself a prison. You are now trapped inside of the wall.
If you're in an extremely secure building that you're afraid to leave or not allowed to leave, like, what is that called? That's called a prison. Right? And that is literally what he's done for himself. Like, he's got this glittering prison, but he's in this club and he's surrounded by all these people and he never goes anywhere. Right. He's got all this money, but it's not like he's jetting off to, Venice or something to hang out. Like, he's literally he's just hiding in this club. So what's our mountaintop moment? What's the example of this?
That leads us up perfectly to the mountaintop. Yeah, our mountaintop moment happens here, and I'll give us a little bit of a lead into it because it's a really fun. It depends on how you think about fun in the context of the movie story, where we have Selena Kyle, who finds out about even worse things. That she knew Carmine was a bad guy, obviously, but she finds out about him having Annika killed. And so she goes in to confront him. She's got the gun. She's planning to kill him. And that's where Batman comes in. And we do get an awesome quote that we're going to breeze by here, but she says he has to pay. And Batman says, you don't have to pay with him. You've paid enough. If you want to learn more about that, we talked about that in the previous episode.
Episode 54 of the WonderTour podcast.
So then he does convince her not to kill Carmine. Eventually, they go through they have a fight. They get taken outside. Gordon comes in and takes away Carmine. And Carmine is, of course, immediately like, oh, I'll see you out here real soon. Threatening Gordon immediately, basically. And as soon as he gets outside, and he is no longer in the position of leverage, right? Like you said, he leaves his castle/prison. Who is there? But of course, Oz, the Penguin, is there to throw stones. And he could never have done that while Carmine was inside of the prison. But as soon as he leaves the walls of his protection, The Penguin is out to get him. The Penguin is considering shooting him, and before the Penguin can even shoot him, we just hear a shot go off, and Carmine gets shot by somebody else. So that's our mountaintop moment is, what happens when you build up this castle/prison for yourself when all you do is look out for yourself in the world? Well, the problem is if you ever leave the premise, there's a lot of people who you no longer have leverage on, you don't have protection from, and they don't owe anything to you. They don't want to help you.
They would be happy to take a shot at you. They might have been waiting for years to take a shot at you, right? Yeah, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? He is purely self-interested. He treats everybody else as if he believes they are purely self-interested, and so the only relationship he's willing to have with them is one where he's got more leverage. And so that's all the relationships he has with anybody in the world. And so as soon as he shows weakness, like, I love the framing of this in the movie. Literally, the moment he steps outside of his sheltering prison, he's killed, which he knew was going to happen. Like he was, he had this bluff going on, but the whole reason he put himself in that position is because he knew he had to be in control or he would lose it all.
Yeah, and can we comment on the fact that it's so brilliantly done from a cinematography perspective, too? This movie probably uses dark and light better than any movie that I've ever seen before. And it's so cool. He's in this, like you said, when he's inside of the prison, of the club, everything's dark and grimy and neon-y. And then as soon as he gets pulled outside, the light is blinding and you can barely see. And there's cop lights and there's paparazzi that are right outside. And it's like, boom, for the first time in a long time, this dude is shown the light. The light is going to purify. And in the situation when you're Carmine Falcone, that looks like you just got shot.
Right. Exactly. There's no partial purification happening. So.
Exactly. You can't be cleansed at that point. You're just wiped out.
Yes, you are the infection. So yeah, so I love the framing of that. I love the visuals of that. Falcone failed to learn the one lesson we always talk about on WonderTour, which is the Doctor Strange lesson of it's not about you, right? The path to leadership, the path to influence over other people, the path to making the world better or different in a way that you perceive. The only sustainable version of that is one where all your decisions are not necessarily about you. Like you can respect yourself and protect your boundaries and take care of yourself. But if you're just making it about you, then eventually you're not a leader, right? You're kind of tolerated as as an overlord.
Yeah, and how do we think about that then? Because it's easy to look at this and be like, well, I'm not as bad as Carmine Falcone. I might justify a couple things to myself. I might justify why I can eat a second dessert. I might justify why I can have another drink, whatever, right? But I'm not Carmine Falcone. Well, sure. And also, I think, at least for me, I can see myself in that. And it's a little bit scary. And it's like you said, it's like Doctor Strange. You almost have to consider always not what can I do for myself, but what can I do for somebody else? Because as soon as even the smallest thing, my consideration is like, well, I should do this for me. And like, I deserve this. Like, that's the risk of falling into the Carmine Falcone syndrome.
Well, and the good things that we see about him, right? Like he is very successful for a long period of time, right? And the reason that he's able to do that is because he has a very strategic mind. He's building things on top of each other. He's trying to set up a sustainable system, right? But also, like his superpower is he actually is really good at sensing what other people need and want. It's just that he does the immoral thing with that superpower, and he says, "Okay, great. Now, how can I push them in the direction of doing what I want?" Rather than, how can I help them the most, or how can I potentially set them up to succeed, or how can I teach them how to avoid their own failure modes, right? He's very clearly identifying other people's weaknesses. Like he's good at that. And that's a skill that a leader should aspire to. But then helping them work through them rather than encouraging them to succumb to them might be a better, something we would encourage. So the power dynamics, like what you choose to do when you have power, but also the consequences of not doing that are what we see comes back to him, right? Is the consequences of like, he doesn't have anybody he can trust. He doesn't have anybody that is actually loyal to him.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about those power dynamics because we've kind of been skirting around it. And of course, power dynamics are natural. Anytime there's two or more humans in a room, there's or even animals, there's some level of power dynamics going on, right? And that doesn't mean that like the human that has more power in a position is necessarily a better human or anything like that. In fact, often it is the person who should have the most power who chooses to lay that down or to serve somebody else instead. Like, wouldn't that be the greater human? But what we see here is he kind of, like we talked about, he builds this castle. Carmine Falcone builds this castle of power dynamics where the only way that he can relate to another human is through holding something over them. Through, like, we see that with Selena, right? His daughter. He is immediately like, she's distraught. Of course, she's using what she learned from him and is trying to, she's trying to manipulate him, but she's distraught. And the first thing he's thinking is like, okay, how do I figure out what she wants and then hold that over her so that I can get what I want? And so it's not possible for him to have a healthy relationship anymore. And then, Brian, for us, for the practical application, it's to recognize that those power dynamics, it's empty, because as soon as you have the power that you can hold over somebody else, what you're holding in your hand is a pile of dust, basically. It doesn't fulfill.
You use the phrase earlier, like the pathology of control, like how that's this, it's almost a disease of the mind of like, I have to be in control. And it seems to me like the times when I succumb to that, the times when I see people succumbing to that, right, it's almost invariably fear. Right. I'm afraid that something bad is going to happen, so I have to be in control so that I can keep the bad thing from happening. Right. And we'll talk about that a little bit more with Batman and Riddler in the next episode. But in the context of Falcone, that fear causes him to never trust anybody. It causes him to not have any relationships based on trust. It causes him to not ever get anything positive back from anybody. And so it's sort of perpetually, like, he just lives afraid all the time. Like, and all he can do is ride the wave of trying to stay ahead of the fear by being more in control. But that's not really winning, right? It's just surviving.
No, it's just emptiness in the end, right? It's like you said, yeah, it's just surviving. It's just surviving so that you can continue to just fight away another meaningless battle.
Right. And that's because, it's because, as we keep talking about with magnanimous leader, like the goal is to be somebody that can aspire to a goal that is larger than yourself and can motivate other people to pursue that same goal. If you don't actually believe in anything larger than yourself, then you're kind of screwed. Like, you're not gonna that's not available to you. But you can't build anything that will outlive you. You can't build an organization that works when you're not present. You can't build a group of people that will be able to sustain things or come back and help you when you falter, unless you're willing to trust them, unless you're willing to empower them, unless you're willing to interact with them in a way that isn't solely based on fear. And so this is what we see is he falls into the dead end, and then he just lives in that dead end until it finally catches up with him. But what we're trying to encourage in magnanimous leaders is this: even if you have the fear, like, look for the opportunities to trust. Like, if you have the fear, but you can sense other people's motivation, you can start to get a sense of what they need and what they want. You have the opportunity to deploy trust. You have the opportunity to deploy hope for a bigger picture goal. And those are things that you can leverage into something that will then give you energy back, that will then not require you to be in control all the time, that will then potentially outlive you.
Yeah, and if you're in an office environment or whatever it might be, and you might even be convinced that, I just need to get a little bit more power so that I can do good with it. So that I can, because I'll do better than the current boss is doing or whatever it is, right? But I've been there. I've thought that before. And that in those moments, it's tiring. It really drains you to be thinking that way of like, I just need a little bit more control. I mean, we do it in our own minds. Like, I just need a little bit more control so that I can have a peace of mind. When in reality, there's no peace of mind on the other side of that thought process. I just need a little more control. So in the opposite of it is, you got to flip the script. You got to do what Batman does with Selena Kyle. She has the opportunity for once. She has the power over Falcone when she's holding the gun pointed at him. And he's like, no, don't do what he does. Instead, do the opposite. He would kill you. For you, like, you let him live, and that is what's going to bring you peace. That is what's going to bring you success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And the fact that he's there in that moment is they were, they're doing something. She was off, she went a little bit rogue, and she was off doing a thing without him. But he went in not for his own goals, but actually to help her. Right? He's like, "Oh, this is going to go badly. I've got to go. I got to be available to support somebody." And so that's a thing that Carmine Falcone would never in his life have done. He's like, "Oh yeah, wow, she's in real trouble. That's not going to work out for her. I'm glad I'm not there." Like he didn't have anybody in the world that he would have done that for. And so he then didn't have anybody in the world that would have done that for him, which, again, pays off in this movie, but is not a stretch to imagine that in the real world.
That was good, Brian. So let's bring it home with some key takeaways.
All right. So what do you got from this one so far?
Well, you gave the one that we always give. It's great. It's cheating, but it's not about you. Very clearly here, it's not about you. We also talked about being wary of moral justification and considering, like, we got to reflect on our thought processes. When I am having to do mental gymnastics to convince myself that what I am doing is okay, that what I am doing is right, that it is healthy, that it is good for a relationship that I have or something, probably a good sign that I shouldn't be doing it.
Or if you're having to explain that same course of action two different ways to different people, right? Probably you're not rock solid in your reasoning, or you're not proud of your reasoning or something.
Oh, that's a Falcone move right there. Yeah, I just gotta lie a little bit when I tell this person, but then it'll sound good to both people and I'm off the hook. It's like, no, right. That's probably a sign that something's unhealthy in your brain. Yep. And we all do that, or we are all tempted to do that.
Yeah. Don't lie to yourself. Don't let yourself do it. Right. And then I think the other thing we talked about was just the, building your own prison out of like making all your decisions on fear is necessarily a dead end, right? And so what you have to do is not be afraid, but to look for opportunities where you can trust somebody and bring them in with you, right? Mm-hmm. And not be in the prison by yourself, and not be it's like, look for those opportunities to build relationships and not necessarily just build leverage, which is a very different dynamic to get skillful at.
Yeah, and if you do end up bound up, kind of like we see Falcone, if you are like having to get on tiptoes to look over the wall that you're building in front of yourself, but like it's okay because you can still see like your family on the other side, and they haven't been totally alienated from you, and you can tell like the cost is gonna be high to tear that wall down. Like, please tear the wall down. Whatever the cost is, there is no cost too high to tearing the wall down before you can't see over it anymore, before you can't walk outside of it without getting massacred. Like, it just is I know the cost is high, but the longer you wait, the cost just continues to multiply.
Right. All right, so let's not do that. Let's not be Carmine Falcone. That's our first villain for the Batman movie. But wait, there's more. This movie offers us a selection of villains to choose from. And we've saved the best for last. We're going to go after the Riddler in the next episode. And we'll talk a little bit about how he shines some light on the character and the challenges of the Batman himself. So we're looking forward to that next time. In the meantime, we hope you enjoyed this with us. We thank you so much for joining us. And just remember, as always, character is destiny.